happen to
Your
be
doors
in those seats.
by this are really?
Right,
I can imagine.
right there, ground zero, you know what I'm
She's studying Hebrew?
That plane came on and said, what happened? It was another plane that had an exit runway. Yeah, it's a tower order. This guy didn't come on and say anything, so I don't know what happened, but man, he was hard.
She could be vice chair.
I fly into LaGuardia.
Good luck. Rite of passage, right?
It gives time for she and I to
The January 16th meeting of the Norwalk Board of Education will be called to order. Our first piece of business is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next order of business will be Spotlight, which features the Rowayton Elementary School cafeteria project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Norwalk Board of Education is proud to recognize the parents and staff who championed the completion of a new lunchroom dining environment at the Rowayton Elementary School. With the successful renovation of the cafeteria, students can now enjoy a meal in a bright, updated environment, which promotes healthy living and a positive social experience. When entering the transformed space, students are met with a sky blue ceiling, large acoustical white clouds, and energy-efficient lighting. Appropriate to our community on the Long Island Sound, the cafeteria has a nautical theme complete with blue-green walls, hundreds of multicolored felt fish affixed on the walls gather to form a large, diverse school of fish. The felt fish also have acoustical, sound-absorbing qualities. The lunchroom is set up as if students are sitting on the inside of a ship looking out to sea. To accomplish this, 4 round portholes were constructed around the lunchroom. Each porthole displays a large photograph of a familiar scene from the Norwalk community, such as an osprey nest, a view from Sheffield Island, children sailing, and Green's Ledge Lighthouse. The porthole photos are interchangeable based on the school's needs. This high-traffic space is used for 6 lunch shifts and before and after school programs. The old wooden gym floor has been completely covered by thick wood-look vinyl flooring. This material requires no maintenance beyond daily washing and is a great labor-saving feature. Students sit at round tables with attractive yellow chairs, enabling inclusive social interaction. Above the doors to the serving area is a long yellow and white strip decorative awning, which nicely matches the yellow chairs. New garbage and recycling barrels in the school colors of yellow and blue also add to the functionality and cohesiveness of the space. School spirit is an important part of the Rowayton culture. Now, above the stage, 8 nautical flags spell out Rowayton. Along the front of the stage apron and along the wall opposite the serving area are rows of nautical cleats, which can be used for coat hooks for the students. An updated menu offers nutritionally balanced meals, including different smoothie every day, featuring fresh fruit and vegetables. Students also have a salad bar option for lunch with protein choices, including diced chicken or turkey and hard-boiled eggs. This is also a green project, as a new dishwasher has enabled the use of reusable serving trays and metal utensils in place of the old styrofoam trays and plastic sporks. The Rowayton School PTA Green Team recently applied for and received a $1,500 grant from Connecticut Recycles to further improve the lunchroom green initiatives. The exceptional transformation of this space will further support learning and provide an inclusive environment where students can thrive both socially and academically. As part of the board's commitment under the strategic operating plan to improve school lunch quality and the dining environment, the Rowayton cafeteria will be used as a model for renovations at other schools. The Board of Education proudly recognizes Rowayton parents Amy Abelman, Heather Schneider, Sylvia Doyle, and Gina Lignani, who spent countless hours organizing this project and shepherding it through to completion. The board also recognizes Rowayton teacher Melissa Petropoulos, who was the teacher representative on this project, as well as interim principal Joe Rodriguez, curriculum instruction site director Rob Pennington, Whitson's Culinary Group, and the MPS Facilities Department for their support of the project. We thank them all for their vision, dedication, and commitment to excellence. Thank you. With that said, I have a few certificates here of recognition, and I would like to hand those out to the members in attendance. First up is Amy Abelman. Thanks, Amy. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Thank you.
I believe Heather Schneider is absent, and the next recipient is Gina Lignani.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gina. Did I get the last name right?
Thanks, you did.
Thanks, Gina.
Thanks so much for your support. Thanks, Mary.
Good work.
Next up, we have Sylvia Doyle. Oh, Sylvia is not here. Thank you, Sylvia. Next is Rob Pennington. Thanks, Rob. Can I get you to? Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks, Rob. And last, we have Principal Joe Rodriguez. Thanks, Joe. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Good job, Joe. Good work. And that concludes the spotlight. Thank you.
Our next order of business will be public comments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barbas. I'm going to be moving on to the public comments portion of the meeting. When I call your name, please come up to the mic. As a reminder, you will have 3 minutes to speak. When you have a minute warning, I will raise my hand to let you know. And when you get to the mic, if you could please, for the record, state your address as well as your name. So our first and only participant in public comments is Joseph Gianderco.
Good evening, Board. Joseph Chanderco, 9 Mott Avenue. I'm here to speak briefly about the proposed school budget and the manner in which the money has been allocated, as I and many other across the district are concerned with how this budget has been constructed. There are several major areas of concern which raise questions that hopefully can be addressed before the budget is finalized and implemented. In what is now year 3 of middle school redesign, there's no additional funding to support the teachers, instructional aides, and administrators at this level, despite plans for STEM and NGSS implementation. This is the level which has seen the most change and upheaval, yet now receives no additional funding to ensure progress will continue and the vast difficulties created by middle school redesign will be corrected. The hasty implementation continues to create problems that NPS staff must address and are forced to create solutions for. These would include multiple oversized classrooms this year, the elimination of stipends, the lack of correct textbooks and resources, no head guidance counselors, subject area leaders, and teams are lost. Teachers were promised payment for their work in designing encore classes in October, but they have yet to be paid. Now, as we move forward with plans for high school pathways and other changes, we would ask for a calm, deliberate pace and careful planning to avoid the kinds of chaos we have seen in the middle school with the lack of meeting times, coordination, or flexibility to meet student needs. Additionally, work was done this past summer to update the music curriculum, but it cannot be implemented with high fidelity and rigor at the middle school level due to the weakened middle school program. Some of the actions have allowed the middle school program to slowly wither and eventually will die on the vine. In fact, some creative solutions have been proposed by music teachers, guidance counselors, and other teachers, which would allow students to enjoy the continued participation in the band program and receive the needed interventions they require to raise their academic skills. These solutions have been largely ignored and passed over.
1 minute.
In closing, I ask the BOE to look for more creative solutions and allow for more flexibility in how we steward the taxpayers' money to create an improving school system. We can address the issues and continue to bring Norwalk forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gianderco. That concludes our public comment section.
Okay. We will now move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things to report on tonight. The first is directly related to your budget discussion later this evening. I had mentioned to you during the workshop that I would be presenting some recommendations regarding the proposal for a fourth elementary specialist at the elementary level, necessary to provide teacher planning time, necessary to affect our agreement with the NFT regarding a 30-minute extension of the day, which would make our elementary school day more competitive with surrounding districts and with our middle school day as well. So you'll see on this sheet that the background itself is summarized, but the cost of six schools to do this is included in the 18-19 operating budget request. As we discussed the last time, we're approaching this in two waves or two phases due to the expense involved. So the first 6 schools would go first in 18-19, and then the following remaining six schools in 19-20. Having said that, I think that all schools are excited about this opportunity, and this is going to provide an exciting opportunity for Norwalk Elementary Schools to enhance and expand the education experiences received by their students. We've done a little bit of work looking at the best elementary schools in our state, both private and public, as well as nationally, and you find in these very best schools, including many of the Connecticut schools of distinction, the fact that there is more than the 3 traditional specials of art, music, and physical education. And among those that exist are the Library Media Center classes, which is the most traditional approach, although that is trending toward exploration and enrichment in what is being referred to as a curated learning commons. The curated learning commons is borrowed from IB methodology, International Baccalaureate methodology, because a curated learning commons is a central part of every IB school. But this is basically a place where students go to learn, to do research and independent learning and group learning. But it also, in the curated sense, it's like a museum where the curator might bring in 2 artifacts, right? And I'm just off the top of my head. You know, one of them might be a module of the space shuttle, and the other one might be a Greek column, right? And so the students explore these artifacts. You know, what's their history? How are they related? What are they metaphors for How do they relate to each other in terms of mankind's reach for the stars and higher aspirations and so on? So this is part of the a very different approach. Second, probably in terms of frequency, is English language arts writers workshop. A lot of our state assessment now in ELA is heavily skewed toward writing. And many schools are providing a special emphasis on that in terms of writers' workshop. Experiential science, having an elementary science lab where students can go to perform experiments using the kits that support the next generation science standards at each grade level is also something that we will find. FLES, this is the acronym for Foreign Languages in Elementary Schools, K-5, where the elementary school will start the language in kindergarten and move up through 5th grade in terms of language instruction. We have Commissioners Network schools in Connecticut that have used most of their additional time to provide intervention and support. We have the 5 pilots in Connecticut in the National Center on Time and Learning pilot, which have basically expanded time to provide enrichment for the poorest students based upon recent research that this enrichment has a very leveling effect on student achievement generally. And then magnet schools, which are the largest group of schools in Connecticut, several hundred at this point, invariably will offer special subjects related to their magnet theme. As I mentioned, many school principals and school governance councils are looking forward to this opportunity to make their school special, at least in some respect, and provide students with a more enriched, well-rounded education. Now, you have a strategic operating plan. It is based on a managed performance empowerment theory of action, which gives autonomy to schools. And your own school governance policy provides budgetary and program autonomy to the school governance councils in each school. So with that in mind, it's recommended that the schools follow these following guidelines that are on the sheet here. For members of the public, there are copies available as well. So principals and school governance councils should consider the following, will consider the following in selecting the special subject. One is the goals of their improvement plan. And I think you're aware that this is the first year that all of our Norwalk schools have improvement plans. That plan is supposed to be vetted by the SGC and approved by it. Obviously, anything the school does needs to be consistent with that, or at least an awareness that this is going to move in the direction of the school's goals. Also, the criteria of the Connecticut Next Generation Accountability Plan, which measures all schools. That plan also identifies schools of distinction. Now, we don't have a school of distinction yet. The schools are in the 1, 2, and 3 category, 1 being the very, very lowest, 2 being in the middle, 3 being the schools of distinction. Most of our schools are in the 2 category, but we have several that are getting close. And again, this, I think the experience of other schools of distinction in the state is something that needs to be taken into account in terms of what they offer. And then just as important, the preferences and aspirations of the school's parents as determined by the School Governance Council. And then finally, special subjects that do not compete with, duplicate, or preclude student participation in the school-wide enrichment model. That's our new emerging gifted program, and instrumental lessons. And then as for the intra-district magnet elementary schools at Silver Mine, Columbus, and Jefferson, they would select a special subject directly related to their magnet theme. We will need several months of discussion and planning at each school to do this well, and they will need to be supported by the talent office, which has to go out and recruit for hiring in areas where we may not have hired, especially the areas where we may not have hired before. We'd like to have that accomplished by June 1, and again, a very exciting undertaking that I think the board and our city will make possible for our elementary students. Second item on my report, if there are no questions on that one.
One question.
Okay.
In the, currently in the elementary schools, is there a major lab component to the regular science curriculum?
No, there is
Classroom
not.
science? There is no lab component.
Well, I wouldn't say there's no lab component.
Major?
There is not a lab component in the sense of the scientific method. Most elementary schools that have a lab component use these FOSS is the major manufacturer, use these FOSS kits.
Yeah.
Okay? And the kits come with all the materials that you need in them. You conduct an experiment. You engage in the scientific method. You write down the results, and then you draw conclusions from it. These kits are geared to the content of the science standards at each grade level. Our district has never invested in that. Not surprisingly, science, which is measured in grades 5 and 8, is our lowest area. And we also do not have curriculum in science. That is next on the agenda for this summer. We'll be running the science curriculum institutes this summer. So we have a long way to go in science, and the lack of the lab kit experience is just one aspect of it.
If I may, I agree. I do know in a number of schools in New York State, there's always a strong push for a centralized science lab, which is not a bad thing if it's kept in perspective, because it should never be a substitute for what we don't have and should aspire to regarding science, and experimental science in the classroom, plus figuring out ways to integrate it into our ELA curriculum. And I think that should, you said we're going to deal with it. That's got to be.
I hope the board,
priority.
I hope the board will support this approach as a goal that we would set for a subsequent year, hopefully next year, to get this started. Prior to this time, our focus has been on improving ELA and math, and we've been successful in that in that regard. But this is clearly the next horizon for us.
Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks. So speaking to that, I wonder, I'm just thinking the question of if there's oversight on autonomy versus parity. Because if you have so much choice for the governance councils, and so many of these things are things we have focused on, language arts, and then you'll have schools that have French and kindergarten and schools that have drama teacher. I wonder if there's a way to tilt the scales towards equal opportunity for an opportunity for joyful engagement at each of the schools.
Well, what would be equal in terms of equity is an additional special subject.
Sure.
And the funding that you provide the schools for this purpose will be absolutely equal. The alternative to this, the alternative to the theory of action in your strategic operating plan, is to simply prescribe on the district level what is best for everybody. And
I'm just thinking, and I wouldn't advocate doing that at all, that doesn't make sense. But rather than prescribe, to possibly winnow some of the options that would be, our students who are of the most need for enrichment might be in a position where their schools might have, you know what I mean?
so, interestingly enough, and this may, at least in part, answer your concern. When I discussed this with principals, there were several who were also talking about a period of the day where different students could choose different things based upon their need. And again, that's an idea that we can support through this process.
And then my other question was, on the back, it says not to compete with or duplicate or preclude participation in the school-wide enrichment model. And I know that's a model that is supposed to be to offer enrichment opportunities not only to academically talented, but to all the students.
Or at least to a broader segment of students, yeah.
Students. How will they know in advance what the school-wide enrichment model will offer?
Oh, well, you just won't schedule this.
Oh, it's a schedule.
Yeah,
it's not
right,
topical.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha.
Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks. So I have one question on it, and so just for clarification purposes, the funding in the budget is to fund the actual positions for the special teachers, but that does not include additional dollars for any programs. So for instance, if a school was to choose to hire a teacher that did project-based learning, it would not, the school would then need to come up with funds from their school-based budgeting, discretionary dollars, to come up with additional materials to implement that curriculum. Is that correct?
The actual dollars, the 600,000 or so for the 6 teaching positions, for those 6 schools, that money would go into their per student allocation on a per student basis. And then they would then make that decision, but they would have the funding for it.
So they would have funding for materials, programmatic
Yes.
pieces, in addition to, depending on how costly that
Yes.
teacher then is. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Well, to equalize this at the school level, in the student-based budgeting, we use average salaries. Now, back office, we use actual salaries. But we don't want a situation where any school is incented to hire an inexperienced teacher over an experienced teacher. We want them to get the best teacher. Mm-hmm. And however that plays out, it plays out in the context of the average teacher's salary. And that's what's charged against their student-based budget when they submit their budget.
So it would serve the school governance council as well then to think about not only what type of programmatic decision they want to make on hiring the specials, but also what additional funding may be required to fully implement that special as well.
That's true. Now, they may get enough funding, depending upon the program, they may get enough funding to cover all or part of that. But again, down the road, I'm sure this is going to be a cost that is built into their actual budget.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barbas. Dr. Adamowski, so first question I have is, it actually is dovetailing off of what Ms. Lemieux said, specifically some sort of a guidance. Now, it necessarily wouldn't be coming from central office, but is there a potential to have the feeder schools and their school governance councils and their making the school special, their excellence model from their school governance councils as suggestions? It doesn't necessarily need to be directly a derivative of where they'll be going into potentially, but just as one option to have that further dialogue, because I know that's something we have discussed in policy specifically around school governance councils, creating more opportunities for the councils to work together, to collaborate, to communicate, whether it's in the feeder pathways or just in terms of the district as a whole.
So these are elementary schools. They are the feeders.
Yes.
The suggestions that we would have are based upon, are on the first page, and they're based upon what other excellent elementary schools are doing. And again, I think our schools are going to be very receptive to this. Different schools will be more or less receptive to different ones based upon their own aspirations, but that does provide some guidance, as well as what the schools of distinction are doing, which is largely in this list of the 4. But I think we also have to keep the door open to new and creative ideas, and the best thinking of our staff as to the needs of their students in each school. And you're right, there's a fine line here, right? And one of the reasons why we review these budgets before they go to you for approval is so that if there is a crazy idea or something that we can see is just not going to be practical, or it doesn't conform to the improvement plan or other criteria, that we can work with the school toward something different before it gets to your level.
Okay.
And we will be doing that in this case.
And Mr. Purvis, do you mind if I just have my follow-up?
No, please.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Lemuel, just take me a moment. So just one, it's on this topic, hopefully quick. What type of communication is going to be used by the different schools to get this new specialty out to the community? Is this going to be something that central office will help support as far as detailed communications, or is it going to be more behooving on the school themselves to really get out there with their new flavors, so to speak?
We have our budget orientation coming up with the principals. They will be taking this issue to their school governance councils. You know, the principal and a parent are the co-chairs. They'll be taking it to their school governance council, and this will be a major part of their agenda in the next 2 months.
I guess I was thinking more in the future. So after the decisions are made, you know, obviously this is something we're on track to have a decision from each of the schools and their school governance councils. You know, as far as once the choices are made and these schools have selected their specialty, are we going to be able to support them from central office and communications? Because I think that's something that has been coming up a bit as far as how do we get the specialties, how do we get the excitement out to the community even further, and where is that going to fall, the responsibility?
Well, you know, our communication office will play some role in that. As you know, we've now achieved a every 2-week newsletter for parents and an every 2-week newsletter for staff. This will certainly be a topic in it. But there is also a school responsibility here. I mean, from the SGC is charged with communicating with its parents, as the principal is, and you know, to communicate well and build excitement over this and make it the positive that it is.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sarah, sorry, work
Very
back
quickly.
that way.
Only having served on governance at 2 different schools, I would say that it's been easier for some governance councils to hit the ground running than others, and so it might make sense to, and I don't know if you're planning to do this, but to have at least the principals and the co-chairs from all the governance councils have some kind of a training or a professional development or a meeting where the scope of the decision is scaffolded a little bit.
If you'd like to make that as a suggestion, we'd be pleased to do that.
That's my suggestion.
I would second that suggestion.
Okay.
I would third.
Okay, I've got it. I've got it.
We're going to work this side. Brian, you had your hand up.
I've got it in stereo. Thank you.
No, that was it. Heidi?
Barbara, I think Barbara was next.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I am enthusiastic about the possibility of science lab and languages at the K-5 level, but I do have a pause about choosing not to have a certified library media specialist, because I have been hearing from our high school teachers that we have students who are arriving who are unprepared for true library research, and I'm also concerned about the slide in our reading scores as we go forward into middle school, that I have seen firsthand what a certified library media specialist can do in a library. I've volunteered in a library with and without, and the hands-on learning, the guided topics, the finding the just right book has been inspirational to witness firsthand, and I am concerned about letting that opportunity go for our learners. By as much as this is extremely sexy, the rest of it, we have a commitment to these fundamentals. And so one thing we could consider going out further is, you know, could we have 5 specials, 1 per day, you know, and have this extra thing be truly extra, but not bypass. I've seen what happens at the elementary level when the library becomes a place you just kind of go, you visit, but you aren't really digging in with leadership there, and it's not a positive direction, I think.
Well, right now, the library program is basically book circulation.
Yes.
With an aide or paraprofessional in the room, and again, that doesn't serve the purpose of teacher planning time, because you don't have a certified teacher that can take the children independently to give the classroom teacher their planning time. There are probably at least 2 schools that I'm aware of, I think, that are leaning in that direction currently. But I would also point out that in order to make this work, you need to have a program, right? Not just a person. There has to be a defined program that is taught in terms of these research skills during this period of time. If you go back to the days when we had library media specialists in all of our schools, those were the days of the CMT, the Connecticut Mastery Test, right? And we've got data going back about 15 years on this. It appears that there was just as much variation among the schools then as there were when we had a library media specialist. So again, I think it's the program, not the person. And, schools, I think, are in a better position to provide that kind of supervision and guidance and insistence on program fidelity when they're making the decision than when it's just, imposed on them from the top down.
I do have one.
I'm going to go.
Eric, right?
Oh, Eric, do you want to jump in?
A super quick question, hopefully. Just going back to the addition of this additional teacher, you did mention that it's going to be working with the talent office to look for outside recruits. Is there also a potential to have inside recruits?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that our teachers would have the opportunity.
We would give preference to inside recruits.
Fantastic. Because, we may have a teacher who is enjoying their time in elementary school, but to have the opportunity to serve in a specialized level to really move this forward. I just wanted to make sure that that was something.
Yeah,
that was
absolutely, and I apologize, I should have mentioned that, but we always give preference to inside recruits.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mrs. Keys.
Thank you so much. Definitely in favor of the 30-minute extension. I wish my kids were, they were getting older now, but I wish we had that when they were at that age during the elementary level, so I think it's great. I also like the idea of having autonomy for our school governance councils, having ideas, sharing best practices. I know Sarah had mentioned that, and Eric did as well, but what works, what doesn't, it's still new, but if you look down at the library media classes and towards exploration, enrichment, and having that, and having the cohesiveness of that, and having students come in, I think is huge. Many of our neighboring districts have library media centers. So that's nothing new, but it's something that I think we really need to embrace here in Norwalk. ELA Writers Workshop, same thing, our neighboring districts have that. You get kids really engaged and excited about writing. You work in small groups, you work in large groups, but they're really motivated to write, and it's contagious. So if you have a group, a cluster of young kids, even starting in kindergarten, that are learning to write, it's just, again, it's contagious, and it carries on. I think FLES, foreign language, in elementary schools, again, nothing new in other districts, and I'm glad that we're bringing it here instead of waiting until they're in the middle school level, but starting it early. Gives them that advantage and that next step and that next level and being more prepared by the time they enter middle school. So I think all of these suggestions are great, and if we have one school doing it and doing really well at it and they're really excited about it, they could share that with other schools, and it might work for other schools as well. So again, having those meetings and having those discussions with our school governance councils, and we've talked about that in our policy meetings, school governance councils, and sharing best practices with each group.
I think your point on learning from one another is one we need to emphasize here. So this is going to be an initial process for our schools. If we were to find, for example, that a school that had a writer's workshop did so much better in writing on our state exams than other schools, that would be a signal to other schools to adjust along those lines a year or two from now. So I think there is going to be a learning process here. It's going to be one that, you could argue this probably should have occurred in terms of art, music, and PE years ago, but we're so used to that, and that's our traditional model. But in this case, we certainly will be providing data to the schools that would be intended to influence their decisions going down the road as they do learn from each other.
And I personally have seen this in schools, in Library Media Center, Writers Workshop, FLES. It makes a huge difference. Kids are really motivated. They're excited, especially at that age, especially when you're starting at age 5.
It makes you wish we could offer all these things.
Buy some Powerball tickets. Brian?
What are the 6 schools?
We do not know the 6 schools yet. We do know that the 6 will be adding the 30 minutes to the beginning of their day. As we examine high school times, we have to anticipate a future where the elementaries are earlier, the high schools are later, and the middle is in the middle. But We're looking at the transportation ramifications of this, because pushing $10 million in transportation at this point, we have to do this in a way that's cost neutral.
So currently we have 6 schools that start a half hour later than the other 6.
We have an early 6 and a late 6, or later 6. They're all late.
Yep.
One of the things I'd heard was that maybe it was going to be, feeder schools.
That's a possibility. We have, again, this is going to depend on transportation and being able to do it cost neutral without adding buses. We have to get 3 trips out of every bus, as we do now, and we have to figure out a way to do that. Frank is in the process, Frank Costanzo is in the process of engaging a transportation consultant to look at this, because this goes beyond the expertise of our staff, which is basically a clerical staff. And we'll again, new territory, great challenge, but one I'm sure we'll figure out.
Thank you.
One thing I'll just mention, I know Heidi went to a conference, a national conference this spring about school start times. Our neighbor Wilton did something about 15 years ago, and Greenwich is just in the midst of implementing this. And I've heard a lot of really mixed feelings in Greenwich. There have been a lot of operational issues, especially at the high school, where it's been much harder to implement than I think they anticipated. So whatever, it could be worth talking to them as to kind of some of the issues they've had and what we might be able to do. I think geographically it's harder for them than for us, but there have been issues that apply to us too.
I think that we're fortunate that there are a number of districts around us that have had a little more experience on this that we can look to. I think one of the most successful has occurred this year in Newtown. And so we've got all their materials and their study and their transportation work and so on. And every time that happens, we can learn from it. And our goal would be to be a little bit better in doing it and contribute to the learning.
And I think, Mike, if I could just jump in, I think learning from some of the schools like Greenwich, we've already done starting the study, but getting some members in from the board and parents that have gone through the process already and have found the difficulties, some of the strengths, the weaknesses, the good, the bad, the ugly, what's worked, what hasn't, but getting some of their experiences here, I think will help us.
And Greenwich is probably not a good model for us, because in Greenwich, they added significantly, I think it was $3 or $4 million of transportation expense in order to do this. We're not in a position to do that. We have to do this on a cost neutral basis. And again, I think it's probably better to look at Weston, although Weston is so small, it's not realistic. Newtown, we'll find some other places that we can learn from.
Okay, well, I think if we've covered that subject, there's a second part to your superintendent's report.
Yes, the second is simply an update and a progress report on one of our priority implementation steps for 17-18. You will recall, board members who were on the board at the time, you'll recall at your annual retreat this summer, we had a discussion about where we were in terms of Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And we have done very well with the Tier 2 interventions. Those are the in-classroom interventions, and the structural interventions that are Tier 2 are things like Read 180, Math 180, and Systems 44. And all of our middle schools and high schools have those Tier 2 supports now. Our elementary schools have the in-class Tier 2 interventions. But thus far, our only Tier 3 intervention has been summer school. All right? Now, Tier 3, by definition, requires additional time in addition to the regular school day, plus a highly specialized personnel. So for example, if you were to do a Tier 3 intervention in reading, you would want someone that is certified as a reading consultant or a reading teacher. And we have very few of those people at the moment. I think Ms. Goss is maybe the only one. But in order to affect this pilot, we are going to have to develop people at that level of expertise. And so we discussed this pilot, this Tier 3 pilot, for a limited number of students in the lowest performing elementary and lowest performing middle school. We knew we had to do it with a university partner because we had to train staff and get them certified in this specialized area. You may recall Sherelle Harris, who was on the board at the time, suggested that we look at doing this in partnership with the Norwalk Public Library. And we have pursued that. The library has been very receptive and helpful. And what Janine is going to report on tonight is the status of this partnership, which is about to be launched on a pilot basis.
Good evening. We've sort of dubbed this the School to Library Partnership for Tier 3, and actually we are in day 4 of implementation. So it started last week. We had 3 days last week. Today was the 4th day. As Dr. Adamowski mentioned, we are guided, of course, by the Strategic Operating Plan, and we are implementing priority step number 27, which is develop and pilot a Tier 3 reading tutoring opportunity in grades 4 through 6. So when you think about SRBI and you think about the framework for Tier 3, this is very important. How to use these criteria in order to develop this pilot. We had to make sure we had intensive instruction. That means targeted, explicit, systematic instruction. We had to also make sure the student-teacher ratio made sense. Right now, we have teachers and students working together in very small groups. The ratio is 1-to-1, or 1-to-2, or even 1-to-3, but no more than that. We are doing this short term. When I get to another slide, you'll see it's 11 weeks. There is progress monitoring. We are doing that weekly. We are targeting exactly what measures match the student's area of weakness, and we are making sure we do that weekly, but it can also be done twice a week. And of course, this is supplemental to what they're already receiving in the schools. Many of the students that are in this pilot, and I'll go over some of the numbers in a little bit, are already receiving Tier 2 interventions in the classroom. Some are already identified, special education students, as well as ELL students. So there are 31 days of instruction for an hour each day. So these students, I mean, that very first day was orientation, so there really wasn't much instruction. They were able to get new library cards. They were able to get a tour of the library. They checked out books that day. They heard book talks that day from our teen librarian. It was wonderful. So I would say these students are getting about 30 extra hours of instruction between January 9th and March 22nd. I would also tell you, too, that even though it's only an hour, you're going to see in a minute, on Thursdays they stay for an additional half hour of instruction where they get whole group instruction. So, for example, last week, Dr. Waters from Sacred Heart taught a lesson on analyzing the author's word choices to determine the tone and the author's feelings. So in order to make this more impactful, we decided to go with 2 schools, one that feeds into the other, and we were targeting grades 4, 5, and 6. I tried to identify at least 15 students from each school. This is what we have as of today. Actually, there were 26 today. One student that did not show up the first 3 days actually came today, so we added him. We have 15 teachers working, 2 substitute teachers just in case, and we have a library assistant that receives the students, takes attendance, gets them set up, and does the arrival and dismissal. So when we think about this blended learning opportunity, students arrive anywhere between 3:15 and 4 o'clock. So from Kendall, students simply ride one of the buses that they currently have. They all load on one bus, and they're brought to the library. Ponus, we had to get an additional bus because there was no room on the buses that currently run from Ponus. But that was not a big deal at all. We were able to do that. So students, like I said, arrive between 3:15 and 4. They have snack. We provide that for them. They're welcome to bring their own as well. And then they go right on the computer So we have that blended learning experience where we're taking technology and implementing that along with the direct instruction they get from the teacher. From 4 to 5 o'clock, there is that direct instruction with the teacher and some assessments. 5 o'clock is dismissal, but on Thursdays, they stay for, like I said, for that whole group lesson until 5:30. We provide a general framework, and this is kind of what that hour looks like, so that students are getting a steady diet of these experiences. So they start with guided reading, where the teacher reads with the student and supports the student at a level that's just the right level of challenge for them. Then they go into about 10 minutes of word study, where they study patterns of words, single-syllable words, multisyllabic words, and every single day students are responding and writing in some way, depending on what students are ready for. Some may just be writing a few sentences to respond to the reading. Others may be writing paragraphs. Then they move into independent easy reading. And then last but not least, the teacher reads aloud complex materials so that there's high levels of meaning making happening and discussions, and as well as progress monitoring. So in order to be very effective, we had to make sure that we were using data. We used universal screening data, we used progress monitoring data, and we also used some common formative assessments, as well as some diagnostic data. So the schools received, this is an example of the form that I provided to Ponus and Kendall, and the teachers identified the primary area of concern, always knowing that comprehension is where we absolutely have to be, and every single lesson involves comprehension, but they identified the primary area, included the data that you see on the right-hand side, so this way it gave the after-school tutoring teachers an opportunity to decide how to group kids and develop lessons. So we did not put students who were learning to lift a three-letter word off the page with students who are now focusing more on vocabulary and comprehension. We made sure that we grouped as homogeneously as possible. This I just put in there today. When I was at the library this afternoon, I wanted to share with you one of the activities that I saw happening. This is Tier 3 intervention. One of the things that I told the teachers that were working with the students is they absolutely have to make sure student interest is paramount, because the students that are coming, and they've admitted to me, they don't love to read. And I get that. If something is hard, it's not going to be something you love to do. But I said to them today, I get it, but you still have to be good at it. So we're going to do our part, but they have to do their part. And this shows that student interest is definitely paramount. There's an article here, short text, about an Instagram, and then another one about Snapchat. And I guess because when you looked at the data showed from NWEA that the student was having difficulty comparing and contrasting. And so this teacher used the scaffold that you see there on the iPad, sentence frames, a graphic organizer, to help the student further scaffold their written response. That's Tier 3 intervention. So it's very important, too, that we communicate with parents. So at least 3 times during the 11 weeks that the tutors are working with the students, the after-school teachers are going to be communicating with parents by way of this communication. We're having it translated right now, one time in January, one time in February, and one time in March. They will add some comments about effort, things that they're working on, and progress that they've seen. Now, there are some teachers who are working through the Sacred Heart cohort as well. So I should have said that from the beginning. There are 9 teachers in the Sacred Heart Clinic course, and they are working to pursue their 102 remedial reading certification, so they're becoming literacy specialists. 4 of those teachers have committed to teaching all 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. But on Thursdays, all 9 teachers come. And then those teachers, because they're under the guidance of Dr. Karen Waters from Sacred Heart, and we've worked very closely together to make sure that all of this dovetails, those particular students that these cohort teachers are working with are going to get an even more formal report beyond this kind of parent communication, because that's what is required of them for the course. It's also very important that we communicate with the schools. I had to come up with a way to keep this open line of communication. So there's a data workbook that is shared with PONUS and Kendall and the teachers and administrators. And every week, our after-school tutors are putting notes in here about how students are doing. I got an email today, for example, that's another mode of communication, asking about the level of text a particular student was reading, and so I quickly forwarded that to the tutor and all as well. So they really are communicating to make sure that we're not working harder, we're working smarter. Now, this is something else that we definitely keep track of. We keep track of students' attendance data. I did emphasize with parents through the communication that I had from the beginning that consistent attendance was very, very important. And if we are not getting good results, this is definitely going to be a variable we have to look at. So I really have to thank our public library. We have spent a couple of months actually getting ready for this pilot. Small as it is, we're really hoping to make a really huge impact in kids' lives, as well as Sacred Heart and all of the teachers that are working together. It's been amazing.
Any questions for Ginny?
Bruce. Thank you. You mentioned 15 teachers, and then you mentioned later on that there is a cohort of 9 teachers. I assume that's of the 15 that are working their way through
Exactly.
Sacred Heart.
It's of the 15.
Yes.
I had to hire like an additional 6 teachers in order to fill the Tuesday and Wednesday slots.
Okay, so of the 15 teachers right now, are any of them certified reading specialists in Connecticut?
I don't know that offhand. I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. I don't think so. No, I should say, one is. One went through Sacred Heart. Dr. Norman Rancourt, actually, went through Sacred Heart, and he is working for me, yes.
Okay. Just for the record, in districts around the country, you have to be certified reading teacher to be a reading teacher. I know Connecticut is way behind the curve on this, and it has been for many years. Now, I happen to be one of those specialists, New York State, and participated in these kinds of programs over a number of years. And I have a question, because what I saw was very familiar, and it does work on occasion. It's difficult within that kind of time frame, 30 hours, things like that. There's a lot, it's not easy to achieve. But what was common to my experience and others, whenever we saw reading and writing broken down into such finite skills that it rarely succeeded in the long run, that there are bigger cognitive issues going on when it comes to language, writing, listening, reading, and things like that. And efforts to break it down into so many measurable skills often can take you in just directions that do not bear fruit, even though you have the data. And I'm wondering if any of this has been discussed with the folks over at Sacred Heart, because there are different theories about what goes on, the types of cognitive processes that go on when people are reading, when they're talking, when they're listening, when they're writing.
Yeah, you make a very good point. We very much stress the reciprocity of reading and writing, and when you bring up Writer's Workshop, that is one of the things that concerns me, is that we have to make sure we're aligned. The reciprocity is very, very important.
But is it true that for an hour, they are breaking, 20 minutes, then bing, and then 10 minutes, and then bing, and then 10 minutes, and then bing? And
Well, this is a general framework.
right.
Yeah, and there is some flexibility there. Today, I did witness them taking more time with one area than the other. It all depends on student needs.
Exactly.
This is just the basic framework, yeah. Some spent a lot more time during independent reading and kind of teaching in and coaching into that. But yeah, this is a general framework.
Just one question. It's come up a couple times, and you just mentioned it. We call it here the ELA Writers Workshop. Is that in any relationship to what was Columbia's Writers Workshop?
Well, the Lucy Calkins work.
The Lucy Calkins.
At Columbia is the Writers Workshop method. And so when you have a Writers Workshop, you generally use her methodology There is some competing methodology, but hers is the dominant one.
I had the opportunity to years ago to work with other teachers and train them in the writers' workshop, and folks from Columbia's Teachers College. And New York, I guess as a district, and other states began to wonder, they like it, it's a good program, but it's not the way it used to be formulated, not what we would call writing on demand. Read something, write about it. It would focus on, it used to focus on more the creative process involved in writing, which is fine. But I know in many districts in New York City and throughout the state of New Jersey, it didn't dovetail properly with the kind of writing that students were being asked to do on their standardized tests. And fault either side, the standardized tests, fault the writer's workshop. The problem was they weren't meshing. And no matter how you cut it, when you're doing a standardized test, you're going to have to read and respond. And often you're being graded by particular rubrics, and often that kind of writing is not what's stressed in Lucy Calkins' approach to writing. Now, I happen to like Lucy Calkins' approach to writing, but it's a different kind of writing. Not all writing is the same. So as an elective here, in some of the schools, I can get it. I'm not quite sure. You'd have to be careful if you're going to try to integrate it into a program such as this. It's time-consuming. You can't break it down into 10-minute blocks. Just not sure it would work.
So your point is very well taken. It's a very sophisticated point that I don't think many people would be aware of. Calkins' work, as you know, was based upon students writing about the things that were most meaningful to them as a writing prompt, right? And then it was an iterative process. Her research suggested that writers do not follow modes of discourse. They simply write and they revise and they revise and they revise until they have a finished product. If you look at our high-stakes state tests today, and Connecticut is no exception, the emphasis is on nonfiction writing and reading. And again, this, being able to read something, make the response, and so on, as you pointed out, this is really it's more aligned with workforce skills than it is with writing for the love of writing or the skill of writing or being able to be a writer, which Calkins' method was. So we do have to be careful with this. It also comes down to what are our local priorities. How much do we value certain things and different approaches.
I will say, just while we're on that topic, I'll just interrupt, and there's a teacher here who's been very involved in that. We did bring parents funded, and I don't know where all the money came from, a readers and writers workshop, and teachers went and got trained, and we spent a lot of time on it, and I'm not sure we were ever overwhelmed by the results. That was my take. Heidi, I think you had something.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. It's interesting to hear your point of view, your feedback on this. One of my concerns, though, also, other than what Bruce was mentioning, was the time frame. Janine, I know you were talking about getting the kids and students engaged and really excited, and might be a topic they're not interested in, but the topic they were discussing before was interesting and they were engaged. When they're coming in at 3:15, sometimes they're there all the way till 5:30. They've had a full day of school. They've got to be pretty exhausted. So I'm wondering how we're getting them motivated. I know that we have an attendance tracker, so we're tracking, and it's a pilot program, and we're just kind of tweaking it and looking at it, but I think my big worry is just keeping them motivated, excited, engaged, wanting to learn, and at that point, at the end of the school day, they're done.
Oh, I
they're
hear
tired.
you. That was my worry, too. I talked to the students about that today.
Yeah.
I get it. Everybody's tired at that time. But that's why when teachers are planning their lessons, we made sure the very first day, when they sat with them, they took an interest inventory. They found out what they were interested in, not necessarily what they'd like to read, because they've already admitted they don't love to read. what kind of sports they're interested in, things like that. So the teachers are using short text in order to kind of get in and out of the reading, but to do, like I said, high levels of meaning making, as well as this guided practice. And that's where we tend to see we're getting the most bang for our buck. Yeah.
Do they also have time? I know that they have kind of small group instruction, but at the end there's a read aloud and the teacher, I assume, is reading, but do they have time as a group to collaborate, to talk, to discuss when they're doing this read aloud towards the end?
It's an interactive read aloud. That's exactly what they do. Why do you think the character did that? What should the character do next? Things like that, yeah.
And I like the idea of the Snapchat, Instagram, that's what kids use all the time,
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
an engaging topic. But, you know, looking at Kendall, Ponus, Feeder School, having these two schools, at some point are we going to look, if we continue this program and this collaboration and partnership that we have with the library, opening up to other schools, if we're finding success here, slowly implementing it in 2 other schools, I assume, at some point?
So we're going to learn from the pilot
right.
this year, but if you were to say, okay, what's the end game here? What's the dream?
Right.
It would be to have a certified remedial reading specialist in each school,
Right.
each elementary school, and to offer Tier 3 interventions in the school during the school year. That's really the place we need to get to complete our, SRBI implementation long term.
Can I just digress back just for one quick minute? At the end of this, is it 20 weeks? you mentioned?
11 weeks.
11 weeks, I'm sorry.
30 sessions.
Are we going to have some kind of survey or something going out to our parents just so we can get feedback? I would say feedback from the parents and the students. What they thought, how the program was, and the parents. But I think we need together, they're separately. Parents
Right,
thought about it
we
and
can
what
do
the
that.
students thought.
I would add, it'd be interesting to see what happens to their test scores this year, if it's possible to look at that.
Is this at the main library or the South Norwalk Library?
We're at the main library, yeah.
Okay.
Stop by if you ever want to come see it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Barbas. On a slightly lighter note, I did appreciate the theoretical discussion between Mr. Kimmel and Dr. Adamowski. I hope they will continue that sidebar from now on. I will admit I was quite a bit lost, but it sounded fascinating to say the least. Needless to say, specifically on this, Ms. Goss, moving forward, what does this look like moving forward? What are we going to be doing with the data? What are the next steps to decide if we are going to be moving this forward? What does this look like? Because this seems like a fantastic program in theory. We're still waiting on the final results to see what type of measures we have from the program. And as one of my colleagues did say, I think it was Ms. Meyer Mitchell, moving forward with what we're going to be seeing as far as results. What does the next step look like, and what is the determination on the district if we are going to expand this further, as Ms. Keys said?
This is very similar to what we did with Summer Academy. We had K-3, last year we had grade 4, this year grade 5. So we have to analyze the data. We have to see what kind of impact it had on students. And if there was not student growth that we're looking for, then we've got to analyze and look at the alterable variables and figure out why. What was it that was getting in the way? So that we can look to expand this, if at all possible, into the other schools and offer this to a greater number of students.
So then it's safe to say that this will be the only programming that we're offering with this specific focus for the rest of the year, and we'll be just taking that data and looking at it for the remainder?
At this point, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
In addition to Summer Academy.
Well, yes, in addition.
Yeah.
Sarah? No? Okay, well then I guess
I just want to thank a number of people as we conclude this discussion. Alicia King in the mayor's office, as well as our librarian Chris Bradley both have been extremely helpful in doing this. I'd like to thank the 9 teachers who have stepped up, who are in the Sacred Heart program for remedial reading specialist certification, and also our partners at Sacred Heart University, who are doing this without charge to us, and again, hoping to find a model that improves the reading of those students who have the greatest reading challenges. And of course, Janine, thank you for your leadership, without which this would not have been possible.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine.
Thanks.
Thanks, Janine. Anything else, Superintendent, or?
I'll do it, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to actions with our consent calendar. which includes approval of personnel, approval of budget transfers, approval of trips. In a second, I'll ask for a motion to go ahead with the consent calendar. Mr. Anderson, before we do, though, I just did want to note in personnel, there are two long-standing Norwalk Public School teachers that impacted many, many lives, and both of them I know quite well. And I knew one of them was in the works, I didn't know the other, but Skylar Livingston, who's really been the kind of leader of our AT program and was just an amazing teacher, I know, for my son. It will be retiring, as well as Kathy O'Connor, who's a kindergarten teacher at Rowayton School, who's just the best. So sorry to be saying goodbye to them both. But Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Barbas, do you mind if I just make a quick comment on that as well?
No, please do.
Viola Skandaris, I do want to give a quick shout out to as well, was my guidance counselor in high school, and through a little bit of turbulent times for my own personal life, guided me and helped me make it to the end of my high school career and eventually got me here. So thank you, or, grievances out to Ms. Skandaris for my participation here, but another wonderful asset that is, I'm really grateful she's going to get to enjoy retirement.
Good to hear. If we can put this all on consent, do I have a motion?
And putting what onto consent, Mr. Barbas?
Items
For
1, 2,
approval.
and 3? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, for approval.
Yes.
ABC, 2 ABC. Yes?
Yes.
Second? Ms. Keys, seconds? Oops. For approval?
Discussion.
Yeah, discussion?
Discussion?
Can I add
Yes.
one quick comment?
Yes, Heidi.
Okay. I also wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Livingston. All three of my kids had him for 18. He's been like a monument at all of our schools. I mean, he's been around forever and just really diligent, hardworking, and kids loved him. And I wish him the best in his future endeavors.
Okay. Could we have a vote? Discussion? Okay, could we have all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay, our next action would be to approve February 2018, recognize it as Black History Month.
So moved, Mr. Barbas.
Okay, second. Ms. Meyer-Mitchell. Any discussion? No? All in favor? Unanimous. Next will be the recommendations of the Finance Committee concerning the board's operating and capital budget requests. Mr. Meek.
Okay, so Finance Committee met last Thursday, the 11th. We approved the operating and capital budgets as presented with one addition to the operating budget. It was in your packet tonight. Basically, the family resource centers, we have two of them. One at Fox Run and one at Merrimack were funded through a state grant that has subsequently been cut from a little over 200,000. It was cut roughly in half, down to 100,000. So the operating budget, as it was first presented, considered closing down one of those. The committee felt that this was a very small expense, and we were concerned about upheaval in service levels. I know there are plans in place at Merrimack to continue the services, but we didn't want to let this one go as it were. So we added the 100,000 to the funding, and that's in the letter in the packet. So that is the one addition that we had since we last met on the 9th.
Okay.
Any questions or?
I'll just say I did hear about this, Mr. Meek, and I appreciate the Finance Committee, which I no longer serve on, considering this addition. I think that we've heard some really great success stories coming out of our resource centers, and it's good to hear that we're trying to support them again as a district, seeing the state funding has disappeared, unfortunately, at least half of it.
Okay, anything further? We will move on to approval of the operating budget request for fiscal year 18-19. We did have a budget workshop on this last week. I think everyone's questions would have been addressed if there were any outstanding issues. I guess, Kristen, I don't know if you're going to make any kind of a presentation?
No, Kristen, but could you come forward in case there are any specific questions? Unfortunately, I have to share with you that Tom Hamilton was in a rather serious ski accident this weekend.
Yes.
And he's dislocated his shoulder. His helmet cracked, so we don't know if there's a concussion involved, and then there's a hip issue. So Tom is home recuperating, and it's between doctor's appointments and x-rays and so on. So we expect he's going to be back in a few days, but he had a very close call. And so Kristen is filling in for him tonight.
Thank you, Kristen.
Sure, no problem.
So I think we did have a comprehensive review last week of this. I think the total percent was 5.3%, not quite evenly broken down between what was categorized as foundation, contractual commitments, basically inflation of our general basic services, and the other half being other steps at implementing our strategic operating plan, which we have cultivated. We have a 5-year strategic operating plan, and we have we've been reviewed this twice now. We've had a retreat each summer to go over it, and so I think it's very clear cut what this money is being spent on, with very specific goals for what the goals are and what we're planning on accomplishing. So I think it's quite clearly laid out, and considering how ambitious some of our goals are, I think it's quite impressive we can do it for that small of increase. So as we go forward now, if I could have a motion.
I will.
Mr. Mead?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion as recommended by the Finance Committee that this board approve the proposed fiscal year 18-19 operating budget in the amount of $194,015,575 as amended.
Second, Mr. Barbas.
Second, okay. Mr. Kimmel?
Yeah, well, I support the motion and would like to speak to it.
Yes.
I know this is the beginning of a process that goes on until the spring. And I know also a lot of people will say, well, this is almost $10 million. This is a lot of money. And they will say, talk about the MBR, the minimum budget requirement, and a lot of issues will come up regarding the amount that we're asking. But I ask those folks to look carefully at the beginning of the budget where the goals are set out. And I just want to make a point that as a city, I think we've been kind of missing the boat. On the one hand, we've constantly railed against the inequities of the ECS formula, and rightly so, to the tune of millions and millions of dollars every year. Yet on the other hand, we've never really funded our operating budgets anywhere close to what we're losing through ECS. And there's been a perception, I think, over the years that we were treading water, just hanging in there despite the ECS formula, doing the best we can. But I had an experience with Dr. Adamowski 2 years ago in the community room that blew me away as chair of the Finance Committee when I found out that we had no Tier 2 interventions. My jaw dropped, and he said, yeah, we are behind the curve. I already knew we were having lots of trouble implementing our correct reports. We didn't have Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions, way behind the curve. I found out last week, I realized, looking at the material we were presented, that we still had we were still wrestling with the multiple study hall issue in our high schools, and we were only asking of our high school students to complete the minimum requirements because of the costs of providing a first-rate high school education. In 2008, the Board of Ed discussed multiple study halls in the high schools, and it was just too expensive, just never dealt with it. So we weren't treading water, we were really sinking. And the last couple of years, I'm pleased to have been part of this with Mayor Rilling, Dr. Adamowski, the council, and the board, to really coming to grips with a basic premise that we've got to face, which we've got to face as a city. We've got a lot of good things going on, from the transit-oriented districts, the mall, all kinds of good stuff. But in the long run, the thing that's going to make or break us as a city, first and foremost, is the quality of our schools. You cannot have a first-rate city, especially a first-rate city in Connecticut, in one of the richest counties in the country, which has problems in its school system. And we are under the gun. We do not get the state aid we deserve, yet we have a moral obligation to provide every kid that goes to our schools a first-rate 21st century education. So yes, it's a lot of money, but it is specifically geared to particular programs that every student, virtually every student needs, and to read that part of the budget closely. Even this evening, we were talking about things, and I used Insights instead of FOSS, Dr. Adamowski, in my classroom in the early 1990s. And we haven't even gotten to that yet. In the classroom science instruction. And that's almost 30 years ago. That's where we've been. And we've been getting by, but slowly but surely sinking. So the last couple of years, this collaboration between the board and the city, I think it's great. We're going to have to figure out a way to fund this, and I certainly hope come the spring, everyone has a smile on their faces, and we're all satisfied. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce. Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Barbas. Just really quickly to comment on this as well, ditto to pretty much everything that Mr. Kimmel said. The one thing I just want to point out is, having served on the Board of Estimate and Taxation and being presented the Board of Education's budget before coming to serve on this board, you know, it was a really wonderful presentation. But the difference is, and what I am absolutely in love with, is our strategic operating plan. We are continuing to follow this with our budgetary needs. And yes, we understand that there were concessions made in past years. You know, we have seen the success, though, when we are spending the dollars and investing in the strategic operating plan. So much like Mr. Kimmel said, I do hope that come spring we are all smiling and, you know, applauding the investment in the one thing that truly does make the difference in the city, the long-lasting impact of our school system. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lyons.
Agree with those comments, and I think you know, a lot of credit has to go to first Manny Rivera, then Dr. Adamowski, Rich Rudel, Mr. Hamilton and his staff. That I'm also a former member of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. I remember what board budget presentations were like 6 or 7 years ago. They couldn't answer rudimentary questions about what the money was being used for. And there was no sense whatsoever of any kind of overall plan of how we were going to change things. And that has dramatically changed over these last years because of these two superintendents and their finance staffs. And I think efforts by members of this board and the Common Council to sort of break down very negative relationships that had existed between the two boards a few years ago. I think they improved dramatically, partially because the board has gotten honest in its presentations on its budgets. We always felt in the past days that money was being stuffed in various accounts. Found out later that we were right. And the money was not being spent in any kind of strategic sense. That has changed dramatically. You know, I'm a conservative Republican, but I don't oppose spending money if I think I'm going to get something for it. And I think that this budget, we've already seen results with closing the achievement gap from initial steps. And I think this budget is going to continue some very significant motion forward for our school system, so I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Going once, going twice. All in favor of the 18-19 budget? Unanimously approved. Now we will move on to approval of the capital budget request for 18-19. Mr. Meek?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thanks. I would like to make a motion to recommend, to accept the recommendation of the Finance Committee to approve the FY 18-19 capital budget request of $15,659,000 and 5-year capital plan totaling $93,942,000. Thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Lyons. Any discussion?
Just a comment briefly that this budget, as Mr. Hamilton pointed out at our committee meeting, does not change the overall budgetary numbers for the facilities plan from last year. It does add a 5th year. We have rolling 5-year budget projections here, and it does add that 5th year. But we're staying within the numbers that we had assured the city last year we would do on that plan. And I want to, as former chairman, I just wanted to note the tremendous role that our new chairman played in getting that facilities plan from a state of near chaos to actually a very well thought out long-term plan. And I also want to thank the mayor and the council in particular for rallying behind us and making a huge commitment of support to building the first new school since 1971 and some major enhancements as well as improvements of the whole school system. And Bruce, I think, again, an indication of cooperation with the city and the board on making a major commitment to schools that have been neglected too long. So I'm very supportive of this as well.
Thanks, Mike. I would just, adding on to that, just say, this is the same dollar amount. It's a reallocation of some of the resources between projects. So you'll see as plans developed and opportunities became available, we fine-tuned the operational aspects of what we're going to try to achieve next year. That includes moving forward on Cranberry and Norwalk High projects in addition to the big 4. And that's what you see here in the outline.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Just for a quick review for those who haven't looked or haven't had a chance to review, the amount proposed for this coming fiscal year would be about $15.4 million. And what's, I think, should be highlighted is it includes seed money to start the design work for the new IB school at 46 Concord Street. This would be an elementary IB school, the beginnings of our IB program, or continuation, but kind of backwards. It also includes the seed money. I think there's someone here in the audience who will appreciate this, $400,000 for the beginning of the redesign work for Jefferson School. And then there's $12.5 million for our existing facilities. And I guess if Tom Hamilton was here, the one thing I think he would probably bring up is he had originally thought, this would be kind of evenly divided over the 5-year time period, but because of some of this, we're getting some state reimbursement. There's certain deadlines. You have to fund it all up in advance. It's a bit lumpier than we had originally expected it to be. So unless anyone else has any more discussions, could all in favor of the capital budget request? Unanimous. There are 8 of us, as Ms. Lemio had to depart early this evening. Okay, we will now move on to information and reports.
Whoa, that's a big deal, guys.
And we're making progress here, and I think we'll have
a couple $100 million.
Another day in the Board of Ed.
We'll have the December 17 monthly financial report from Kristen.
First, I want to say thanks for approving the operating capital budget. We're very happy about that. And not a lot to report about December year-to-date financials. At this point, or at that point in the year, the total year, part of the year that has passed is 50%, and the school year that has passed is 40%. So if you look at your tracking summary, everything's pretty much in line with that. Salaries are at 38%. Benefits, 48%, contracted services, 32%. Seems a little bit low, but that's just how it's a timing of after-school police charges and contracts in general. Property services, 51%. Other services, which has to do with transportation and special education, 57%, and that's directly related to transportation because we have to pay the transportation bills up front in order to get the discount. Supplies, in electricity, 39%, equipment, which is an instructional equipment and software, 46%, and other objects, which is mainly dues, 56%. So not a lot to report there. One comment, the substitute budget is running a lot lower than it has been. If you look at accounts 103, 118, and 128, the year-to-date actuals are 671 versus last year of 882. So I know Brian's happy about that.
And do we know why?
Do we know why?
No, we do not.
Yes.
It may be the halo effect that we're studying it now.
That
is partially true.
We do have tighter controls around the allotment of the substitute assignment. So there's no longer local padding of resources that may or may not be needed. This is an actual reflection of the absentee, the need for the fulfillment of the spot.
We are going in next year to, for the first time, to allocating the day-to-day substitute cost to the school budgets. The district will retain the long-term substitute costs, which the schools cannot retain. Sharice Sherry is working on the study that will be presented to you shortly regarding the study of last year's absenteeism. And there are a number of very interesting objectives that come from best practice in other districts that we'll be making at that time and recommending further. But one of them definitely is having the short-term daily costs in the school budgets and allowing the schools to utilize those funds if they don't use them fully for absenteeism. It just brings a halt to the growth of the substitute expense.
And while this doesn't look like a material expenditure so much, as my colleague, a former educator, pointed out, this is a tremendous opportunity cost to the district in terms of lost time, instructional time, and worker morale, and a whole host of other things that just have way more than financial impact.
That's right. Bruce, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say that's an interesting item to track because in my own experience, and I'm sure others, this does have an impact directly on student achievement. And if it is out of control, there will be some classes, their student achievement will not be where it should have been, whereas in others it would be. So you really have an inequity in a system that goes way beyond dollars and cents. And I'm glad that this issue is a focus. I was pleased last week when we met and found out that it's something that Mr. Meek keeps track of because I had no idea that it was something that needed to be kept track of. I think all districts should do it just to keep things on an even keel, but it is extremely important.
Okay. Anything else, Kristen?
As a lot of people know, we had done a stipend revamping and project, and we're almost through that, and at that point in time, we'll do the appropriate budget transfer to move the money out of the salary accounts into the 139 stipend account. And on a related note, someone had mentioned the encore payment, so I just wanted to make a clarification there that they will be paid very shortly. We just had to get the final list together of the teachers who did actually create the new class, and they will receive $500 per new class. So that's coming on its way. The contract didn't say anything about an actual payment date, so I think it's fine the way it is for now, and then maybe we just talk about an actual date for next year. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yep. At this point, longevity, the only group that has not been paid that yet is the food service group. Our fringe benefits are right at 50% where they should be. Unemployment looks really low, but that's just, it's lagging, just the timing of the bills and some other things we've received from the state, as you are aware. Contracted services, a lot of that is just timing. Maintenance is pretty much up to date, and transportation, like I had mentioned, looks high, but that's just the timing of when we have to pay that bill in order to get the discount. Not much else really to report there, so we're pretty much trending where we want to be. We have a lot of controls and cleanup going on. Any questions on that?
Okay.
No, thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Call me with any questions on the budget or anything else.
Okay. We will then have board members give their committee and/or representative reports. So I don't know, Ms. Corbett, if you'd like to start at that end, if you had anything you'd like to.
I have nothing at this time.
Okay. Mr. Lyons.
Negotiations, we only have one contract left. All contracts have been signed with our unions except food service. We have a mediation with the food service group on Thursday. So we're hoping we can put that one to bed as well. We have no current grievances before the negotiations committee.
Thank you. Mr. Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Barbas. Reporting from our Special Education Ad Hoc Committee, I first want to take a moment to thank all of my fellow board members that have reached out to me or have asked specific questions about the budget. We are going to be having a meeting of the Special Education Ad Hoc that is going to do a deeper dive into the special education budget, our goals, and what we're looking at. It was scheduled for this Thursday. Unfortunately, due to committees members not being able to attend, and of course, with Mr. Hamilton now being out for at least the next several days, Kristen Carsmith was going to be joining us in that, so I'm going to be moving that to next week. I'm going to be reaching out to my fellow committee members and Yvette Gorovich to see what date would be most amenable to the entire group. I do want to make an announcement as far as our representatives. We are doing an overhaul of the committee members, and I'm excited to say that we have 2 new parent representatives. Jessica Garnett and David Hevelman will be joining our team. Jessica Garnett has a child that is outplaced currently, and David Hevelman has a student that is in district. So I'm liking this new focus of representation of parents, and Yvette Gorovich and I are currently working on solidifying our new staff members. As just a point of information, it will be hopefully somebody coming in from NECC, as well as one of our other established programs, which I'm looking forward to having them join us as well as we solidify those members. So I will keep you all informed to when that new meeting will be. Typically going forward, it will be the 3rd Thursday of every month at 7 p.m., but due to unforeseen circumstances and trying to be accommodating to my fellow members, I did want to make a shift on this and allow us to have a really productive meeting.
Okay, Mr. Erickson, thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
I had a really good friend named Eric Erickson. I was too confused.
That's Andy Erickson.
So, moving on from that, in terms of the Facilities Committee, I think we have not had a meeting recently, but a lot of stuff has been going on with the committees for the 2 building projects, both Ponus and Columbus. And we've made, I think, good progress. Ponus, really a lot of progress. Columbus is getting there. The architects have now 2 proposals, and we're trying to figure out which one is best and most cost effective. The tennis courts were approved at the Ely site, Columbus site, the incremental courts and the rebuilding of the existing. That just happened at the Parks and Recs Committee last week, the Common Council last week. So I think that's all moving along, and as I mentioned, the capital budget, we have initial seed money for the IB school at Concord Street, as well as the Jefferson renovation. So, we're kind of pulling through on the plan that we have outlined. So we'll keep you posted as that continues. I think really probably Ponus and Columbus, those will be the next big deals, and also identifying the renovation work we're going to do in existing buildings. Obviously, we're going to finish the windows project at West Rocks. We've got to finish the asbestos project at Cranberry. We're doing the electrical assessments at both Cranberry and at Fox Run. I know the company went to Fox Run. I haven't had an update yet on where it stands at Cranberry, but they'll be back to us with reports shortly saying how the electrical kind of shortfalls in both those buildings can be improved. And we're still working on Norwalk High, finalizing the work we'll do at Norwalk High School this coming summer. Mr. Meek.
Thanks, Mike. I'll go quick on Ponus Construction Committee, or Building Committee, which has kind of focused on building a 1-story addition on the southeastern part of the land. This economizes the available real estate, forgoes the need for elevators and stairwells that take up a lot of the footprint. It includes a really nice large math science lab, if you will. So a lot of that, it will fit into, they have to do topographical surveys now to see how much ledge is where. So things are moving along. It's exciting. Moving quick to AT Redesign Committee. The committee has been meeting. I've been a little remiss with some daytime obligations. But the committee is actively studying some models to increase the talent pool of young scholars while eliminating the pull-out nature of the current program design. The committee has had several site visits to programs around the state, including Bell Academy, Charter Oak International, and King Philip Middle School. They had a student focus group last week, so they're getting student level input as well, and are planning an outreach to the SGCs, maybe in the form of a focus group as well, or some other format. And they believe they are on track to make a recommendation in February to include an instructional model, professional development plans, and modifications of the current assessment procedures. So that's that. And real quick, we talked about most of what happened in Finance Committee. I would just say an announcement that the February 8th meeting is canceled. There will be other budget hearings going on with either the full council or some combination of this body and that body in the coming weeks and months. So we won't have that meeting, but we will have some others, so keep your ears peeled for that. And last but not least, sincere thanks to Nina, Kristen here, Tom, and the rest of the finance staff who put a solid budget together for us this year. Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Keys.
Mr. Burbis, a little bit about policy. We just met last week. We're having a robust discussion about Title IX. We spoke to Sharice, who's been working very closely with Anthony Shannon. We also had Bob Cosienda from the Student Youth Leadership at Ryan McMahon, and he brought, this is the second meeting that he's had, he's actually brought some student representatives who've had some input, some ideas, some thoughts on how we can kind of look at Title IX, so we're working closely with them with their input and their ideas. We hope to discuss it again during our next policy meeting, which we'll need to do, and then we want to bring it to the full board for discussion. When we do bring it to the full board for discussion, we'll have Anthony Shannon make a full presentation, a lot of legal issues that I want him to be able to cover and answer any board questions. We touched upon, again, school governance councils and the makeup, looking to tweak that a bit. So we did discuss that briefly during our last policy meeting. We'll be bringing it back again for our next policy meeting to discuss further. We also had an audit done on our policy books, so we need to really dive in and work on that. So I'll be working closely with Frank on that, as well as policy committee members.
Thanks.
Heidi, is that something that would be available to the full board to review?
We first will be discussing it as a committee, and we'll be bringing it to the board. We're going to be looking at each policy and what we need to discuss and what we need to change and what we need to add as well.
But the material is not available?
Not yet. We need to discuss it in policy first, and then it will be available to everyone else as well.
Okay. Anything, Bruce?
Yeah, the curriculum committee met, I'll say for the first time, earlier this evening. And why I say for the first time, this may be a first for Norwalk. I don't know if either the council or the Board of Ed ever had one of its committees, one of its standing committees, be made up of all new members. Okay? This was fascinating, especially in curriculum, because there's so much going on, and which began a year or two ago, or a year ago. And so what our goals are is, first of all, is to get Craig to bring us up to speed on some of the initiatives. But we spent most of this evening discussing the, what is it called, the Springboard Collaborative, and which will, I guess, change the way some of our summer programs work. We plan to continue discussing that at a special meeting on the 30th, because there are some time constraints where we have to come to some decision. So we met for the first time. We're going to have a special meeting on the 30th, and we plan to meet on a monthly basis, and hopefully all the curricular matters that come before the full board will find their way through our committee first, and we'll find a way to slow everything down. As you saw the questions asked tonight, just from the superintendent's reports, this is going to be fascinating. So it is a good meeting, and like I said, a first for me, because I'm new, and so is everyone else on the committee. So I enjoyed it.
Barbara.
Thank you. Chairman Barbas appointed me as representative to the Collective Educational Services, and we had our first meeting with a new group of people. It was really a wonderful opportunity to meet with representatives from boards across our region of the state, and a great opportunity to learn about best practices. One of the things that I got as a takeaway was that they have actually a special education consulting review services that seem useful and affordable, and something we could consider as another set of eyes as we tackle moving forward on special education transformation. Yesterday we had wonderful programs at West Rocks to celebrate and commemorate Martin Luther King Jr. Day with keynote speaker Bob Duff. I did want to highlight the scholarship program that is run by the Norwalk Housing Authority, which apparently is quite groundbreaking and really should be, Curtis Law should be commended for having the vision to create a program that provides college scholarships to people who might not normally have access to that. And finally, tomorrow, I will be participating in a school finance panel organized by Senator Bob Duff, and I look forward to learning. Katie Roy from the School Finance Project will be presenting, and I think that's a great opportunity for us to learn from her. That's all I have.
Okay, well, I think that concludes, I guess, board member announcements. I don't know if there are any board members who have any announcements or if we covered everything already.
Just on a light note, Mr. Barbas, it feels like I should be switching seats with Mr. Meek because there seems to be a common theme, at least amongst 4 of our board members this evening. Unplanned. Unplanned.
Yeah, come on over, Eric.
You can have a group photo later, folks.
Brian, did you have anything?
Oh, that's like right over my head. Oh, NECC had a nice little Christmas pageant. The music therapy guy, I forget his name, but they played songs for the kids, and the kids got involved. It was nice. It was kind of it was a nice, warm, open house feeling of the building, and a lot of parents came out for it, and it was good to see that participation there. Thanks.
Ms. Keys.
I forgot to mention for the board member announcements, Martin Luther King Day, obviously, I know Barbara was touched upon it a little bit before. There was a program at West Rocks that I went to, and then last night they had a big community event. Dr. Adamowski was there. I think, Bruce, you were there as well. So it was just a nice celebration of everybody getting together and celebrating Martin Luther King.
Oh, good. Okay, well, if that is it for public comments,
Mr. Barbas, I apologize. I forgot to mention this during my announcement on my special education committee. I did want to thank Jackie Lamb, Jeff Spar, and Natalie Alonso, the former non-board member representatives on the committee who have served with Dr. Vel Crevecoeur, Yvette Gorovich, and former director Dr. Toper. They really have been groundbreaking members of a committee that hasn't existed before, so I wanted to thank them on record for their participation and look forward to having their input as members of the community, very valued members of the special education community going forward.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up board member announcements, and now we need to approve the minutes for the December 5th and December 19th meetings.
Mr. Barbas, do you
yes.
mind if you split those, since I would need to abstain from one?
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
So if we if everyone has had a chance to review the December 5th minutes. Yes, Brian?
Yeah, there's 2 corrections on the December 5th minutes. They're on the committee reports, I think under my section. Sorry, I don't have the page number. It should say AT redesign and not middle school redesign. And then the other small point, Finance Committee convened on December 14th, and I believe it said the 18th. So that's just a date correction, and that's it. Thanks.
Mr. Lyons.
On page 7 of the December 5 minutes, we have item 3, approval of memorandum of understanding, but the vote on that item which we approved is not in the minutes.
Oh.
The following item on the assignment of grievance hearings is, I think you need to just go back to the tape and get the vote information and insert it there. I know we approved it, but it should be noted in the minutes.
Okay. So could I have a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
So moved.
Second? Ms. Keys. All in favor? Unanimous. The minutes for December 19th. Are there any corrections? I guess there are no corrections. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Lyons and Ms. Corbett, and all in favor? Aye. I guess 7 in support, 1 abstention.
One abstention,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so that's the approval of the minutes. We will be going into executive session. We'll take a 5-minute break. And, yes.
Make a motion to go
Oh,
into
that's
executive
true.
session.
Yes, we have to motion to go into, sorry about that. I always forgot that. Oops. And it's seconded by Ms. Keys. And all in favor? All in favor? Okay, see you back, or no, we won't be seeing you back in 5 minutes, but